Alright. Hey guys. Hopefully I'm coming in loud and clear. I'm just going to move the mic a little closer. Alright. Looks like we're live. I believe I have good sound. If anybody's in here, just go ahead and let me know if I sound alright before I get started. Just gonna give it a minute or two for people to pop in. Got a lot of ground to cover today with this piece. We are gonna touch on some pretty heady things, some pretty revealing things, some things that might upset some people. But you know, that's good. That's good. Hey Blue Owl, how's it going? You having a good day? Good afternoon? Good Friday? I do have a preloaded song ready to go for this one. I haven't done one of these in a while, but I guess while we wait for a couple people to trickle in, I will fire that song off, and hopefully that this works. Ooh. Coming through my speakers. I have to turn that off real quick.
Before the heavens had a name,
song.
Before the cosmos came to be, Zeus swallowed light and became all things, the first Logos eternally. They tell you that the truth began 2,000 years ago, but the word was spoken long before their stories ever flowed. In the belly of the God who held the cosmos in his frame, the same pattern, different name. Zeus is the first and the last, the head and the center, all things from him. Dismembered for our sake. From ashes we were made anew. The heart preserved, the cycle breaks. This salvation isn't new. They twisted ancient wisdom into something they could own. Repackaged revelation built on foundations not their own. The same divine compassion through the sun to set us free. The same story, can't you see? Zeus is the first and the last, the head and the center, all things from him, born male and female, beyond all limits. The word was corrupted, but never dies. In his body dwells the stars, his eyes the sun and moon. The golden chain connects all things, the truth cannot be hewn. They tried to cut the Orphic root and claim the flower their own. Underneath the borrowed words, the same seed has been sown.
All right, guys. How was that? Just a fun little intro song to get us started today. Now that I got a few of you in here, we are going to get started. Today we are going to be touching base on the Titanomachy. Now, some of you who have been watching this channel for a while, I've been working my way through the Orphic rhapsodic theogonies and creating videos, both live streams and some more high-end production videos, talking about what this mythic creation story is all about and how it relates to others in the Mediterranean as well as Christianity, because this is like the foundation of what Christianity was built from. And today we're going to start picking at some of what, that foundation was built on. We're going to be picking up some pretty key pieces about how Zeus represents kind of like a proto-Logos, Logos being, the idea of Christ being the Word or the beginning of all things, the nexus from which all things come. Well, this is often presented as a very unique and a very innovative theological construct from Christian apologists. And what we're going to be doing here today is dismissing some of that, because we can see quite clearly within the Orphic rhapsodic theogonies and things that are potentially coming about 6 centuries before the emergence of Christianity. We can see that they are being formulated by the Greeks and by others in late antiquity. And what I'm really getting at here with this is that late antiquity was a melting pot. It was an area where people were sharing ideas and where different cultures would share their stories, share their mythologies, share their religions with each other. And they would say, hey, you know what? I recognize that very much in my own traditional myths. And so when somebody said, hey, I'm talking to you about Zeus, somebody over, in another part would say, hey, that's Marduk. Yeah, we have that guy over here too. Instead of what eventually happened much, much later, centuries later, where the denial of said entities began to be a more commonplace thing as the church began to gain its power. We're going to be talking about pretty advanced pieces of the Orphic rhapsodic theogonies. The Titanomachy in particular, I think, is really critical, and that's the kind of where we left off with a lot of the other Orphic live streams. I talked a little bit about Zeus and Hades, but we're at the point now where we really need to talk about Zeus proper, what Zeus was to the people of late antiquity, and what eventually got encoded into the Christianity's, adoption of these ideas of the Logos, of transcendence and immanence, of a soteriological foundation for their theology where salvation was key. This is something that the Orphics had in spades. They were very interested in this. And so let's just get started. So when we think about the Titanomachy, this is the war between the Olympians and the Titans, and it is often presented as this really epic mythological war with the Titans on one mountain and then the Olympians on another mountain. The Olympians are on Mount Olympus and the Titans on Mount Orthus. Now, this idea of a power struggle, of a rebellion, are very prominent. Oftentimes we see Zeus portrayed as power hungry and or a usurper of the natural order. It is kind of portrayed, and sometimes we will see, if I get to it today, the descriptions from Christian apologists of Zeus as being this monstrous being, this snake. And so we're going to kind of dispel some of that today. But I wanted to start out, just so that we're clear, from the Bible itself, from the New Testament. Colossians 1:16 through 18 says, "For in him all things were created, things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or powers, or rulers or authorities. All things have been created through him and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. And he is the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning and the firstborn from among the dead, so that in everything he might have supremacy. Now, this is, we're thinking about 60, 62 AD, so roughly, 60 years after the supposed historical Christ was walking the earth. But right below that, what we have here is the Orphic great rhapsodic hymn to Zeus. Zeus was the first and the last. Kind of sounds like an alpha and omega situation. We're all very familiar with that terminology. The lightning's lord, Zeus head, Zeus center, all things are from Zeus. Zeus born a male, Zeus virgin undefiled. Zeus the firm base of the earth and starry heaven. Zeus sovereign, Zeus alone, first cause of all. One power divine, great ruler of the world. One kingly form encircling all things here. This we have evidence of in Aristotle's De Mundo. That's 3rd century BCE. Now, just looking at them, just hearing them, it's very, very similar. This idea of a transcendence and an eminence being the primary innovation of the time in late antiquity, from classical Greece into the Hellenistic age, and then after that into the emergence of Christianity. This idea of a transcendent Father and an eminent God is very present, and you read these, it's not very hard to put it together and say, oh, okay, these guys are talking about the same thing, just using different names. Now, moving forward in this Titanomachy, we're going to, bring in some of the Orphic. We're going to bring in some of what Hesiod has to say. And in fact, I think before we get into this slide, I do want to read a passage from, because it's so ingrained in us. We have these ideas from Disney about Greek mythology, about how it was presented and whatnot. Even in some of the mythology books, you get this kind of it's an unclear picture, at least metaphysically or theologically, what is going on in these myths. This piece is from from a mythology book that's quite popular. I think it's Oxford Press. It says, when Zeus had grown to maturity, Kronos was beguiled into bringing up all that he had swallowed. First the stone and then the children. Zeus then waged war against his father and his disgorged brothers and sisters as allies, Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, and Poseidon. Allied with him as well were the Hecatonchires and the Cyclopes, for he had released them from the depths of the earth, where their father Uranus had imprisoned them. The Hecatonchires were invaluable in hurling stones with their 100-handed dexterity, and the Cyclopes forged for him his mighty thunder and lightning. On the other side, allied with Kronos, were the Titans, with the important exception of Themis, her son Prometheus, both of whom allied with Zeus. Atlas, the brother of Prometheus, was an important leader on the side of Kronos. The battle was of epic proportions, Zeus fighting from Mount Olympus, Kronos from Mount Orthus. The struggle is said to have lasted 10 years, and this excerpt from Hesiod conveys the magnitude of the ferocity of the conflict. And he says, this is from Hesiod, verses 678 through 721. The boundless sea echoed terribly, earth resounded with a great roar, wide heaven trembled and groaned, and high Olympus was shaken from its base by the onslaught of the immortals. The quakes came thick and fast, and with the dread din of the endless chase and mighty weapons, reached down to gloomy Tartarus. Thus they hurled their deadly weapons against one another. The cries of both sides as they shouted reached up to the starry heavens, for they came together with a great clamor. Then Zeus did not hold back his might any longer. But now immediately his heart was filled with strength, and he showed clearly all his force. He came direct from heaven, and Olympus hurling perpetual lightning. And the bolts, with flashes and thunder, flew in succession from his stout hand, with a dense whirling of holy flame. Earth, the giver of life, roared, and everywhere aflame on all sides the vast woods crackled loudly with the fire. The whole of the land boiled, as well the streams of ocean and the barren sea. The hot blast engulfed the earth-born Titans, and the endless blaze reached the divine aether. The flashing gleam of the thunder and lightning blinded the eyes even of the mighty. Unspeakable heat possessed chaos. The sight seen by the eyes and the sound heard by ears were as if the earth and wide heaven above collided. For the din, as the gods met one another in strife, was as great as the crash that would have arisen if earth were dashed down from the heavens, falling on her from above. And he goes on. This is a massive cataclysm that we are experiencing, right? And it echoes very much what we might consider in Revelations. And I'm just going to pull up a piece here from Revelations. Now arose in heaven Michael and his angels fighting against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought back, but he was defeated, and there was no longer any place for them in heaven. And the great dragon was thrown down, that ancient serpent who is called the devil and Satan, and the deceiver of the whole world. He was thrown down to the earth, and his angels were thrown down with him. This kind of extremely epic proportion, this battle in the heavens, is echoing here in Revelations. And what happens, of course, when Zeus prevails over the Titans is very similar to what we just experienced here with Michael throwing down the defeated into the pit of hell. Well, that's the same thing that happens to Kronos and to the Titans that stand against Zeus in this moment, in this epic cosmic clash. This is the picture that we typically get when we hear of the Titanomachy, this thunderous clashing between gods and titans and this brutal battle for power. One of the pieces that really comes to us in Revelations is an echo of this epic battle. But what is not presented more often than not, I think, in particular, is the compassion aspect. Now, this is very prominent in Christianity and in the presentation of the Christ overthrowing all of these powers for this compassionate purpose to free people from the misery of life and of sin and all these great things. But then when you present Zeus, it's often presented, and this is often done by apologetics in the 2nd, 3rd century, presenting Zeus as barbaric, bloodthirsty, constantly, after lusting after women, and bringing out the worst parts of the stories, and bringing them out without the proper context, bringing them into the debate with a very biased and a very contextually framed reference point. But there's this piece that begins in Hesiod before 678, and I wanted to read that to you. For the Titan gods, and as many as sprang from Kronos, had long been fighting together in stubborn war, with heart-grieving toil. The lordly Titans from Mount Othyris, but the gods, givers of good, whom rich-haired Rhea bare in union with Kronos from Olympus. So they, with bitter wrath, were fighting continually with one another at that time for 10 full years, and the hard strife had no close or end for either side, and the issue of the war hung evenly balanced. But when he had provided those three with all things fitting, nectar and ambrosia which the gods themselves eat, and then with their proud spirit revived within them, all after they had fed on nectar and delicious ambrosia, then it was that the Father of men and gods spoke amongst them. Now this is the important part. Zeus, in the midst of this 10-year chaotic battle, where everyone is suffering, including, the particular form of mankind that was supposedly alive during this time, before the reign of Zeus. So you've got to imagine this has got to be tremendous, tremendous suffering happening in this 10-year battle between these cosmic forces. Zeus stands up, and he says, "Hear me, bright children of earth and heaven, that I may say what my heart within me bids. A long while now we, who are sprung from Kronos and the Titan gods, fought with each other every day to get victory and to prevail. But do you show your great might and unconquerable strength, and face the Titans in bitter strife? For remember our friendly kindness, and from what sufferings you are come back to the light from your cruel bondage under misty gloom through our counsels." Now that doesn't sound to me like somebody who is bloodthirsty and grabbing at power. That sounds like somebody who is trying to resolve a sense of suffering that is occurring in the world. Echoing this in Matthew, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls." This is the side that's not normally shown of Zeus. The compassionate nature, the love and desire to provide for the cosmos, as was his right in the idea of succession. This is what the Orphic cosmos really thrives on. There is a specific succession that is supposed to happen, and if you've followed the channel, if you've listened to some of the live streams before, there was a succession that was planned at the beginning, that in each succession, the passing of the scepter of power, the scepter of Erechipaios, was supposed to occur. It occurred from Phanes to Nyx, and Nyx then willingly gives it up to Ouranos, but Ouranos takes a sharp 180 on this and he doesn't give it up. And thus what happens in that moment, not giving up his power, in shutting up his children out of fear of a prophecy that he would have to give up his power one day, he generates what might be considered a sin or some sort of breach of the divine and cosmic order. And this is very important, and we'll get to this here in a minute. There is a breach of divine order that then causes this cataclysm that we're experiencing now with the Titanomachy. Now, Kronos attempts to rectify that, but in doing so also falls prey to what his father did. And then he clambers onto power. And as we know from the myth, Kronos eats his children to try and prevent his overthrow. And so from that, what we see happening is Zeus is basically saddled with the correction of these things. And we will see in the Orphic Rhapsodies that he is educated by Nyx, educated by Adrastea in the cave, and told what the divine cosmic order is. So this is a story about the ascension of Zeus and his son Dionysus. That's what the entirety of the Orphic Rhapsodies are. Now in Orphic Fragment 154 he says, "Imitating in this the maker of the universe, who prior to the whole fabrication of things is said to have approached to the oracle of night, to have been there filled with divine intellectual conceptions." He's being educated on the divine order. So he says, "Meanwhile Zeus grew in strength, and when the time was ripe," so this is before the rebellion, this is before Zeus and Kronos go to war. "He grew in strength, and when the time was ripe, blessed Nyx instructed him, 'When your father is in the oaken wood, and drunk with the fruit of bees, then bind him.' Zeus told his mother all that which the goddess decreed, and acting upon her advice, Rhea threw a magnificent banquet, and along with course after course of delicious ambrosia, she gave Kronos great draughts of golden honey, and soon the powerful Titan became inebriated. The room of the great hall began to spin all around him, and he longed for the open air. Kronos left the banquet and wandered about. At last he was laid down and fell asleep, snoring loudly. Zeus and his confidants, his brothers, went in search of him, and just as Nyx had foretold, they found him in the oaken wood, oblivious to their actions. They bound the god, and Zeus castrated him, just as Kronos had previously castrated his own father." Now, you get competing ideas here from Hesiod and from Orpheus. Hesiod, I think in one version that comes down to us, there is a version where Zeus kills Kronos. There's a version where Zeus is castrated, and there is also some versions, and I can't grok right now who the author was, where Kronos is simply just like dethroned, not castrated necessarily, and not even imprisoned. Sometimes he's imprisoned, sometimes he's not. The point is, this is a very different version than what we are used to seeing, is that in this moment, Zeus inebriates him, he gets him to lie down, and then he is basically beset upon just as Kronos beset Ouranos with his brothers. This was something that Uranos did, of course, foresee and also declare to his son that this same thing would happen to him. What did Kronos do? Resist that prophecy. This is the thing that Zeus will not do for the most part. He will not resist the prophecy. He seems to take instruction very well from Nyx and understand that the prophecy is going to happen regardless of how much you resist it. We've already read this piece up here, but I reference back to Colossians 1:16. For in him all things were created, in heaven and on earth. So what happens after he cuts off the phallus, dethroning, taking the generative power from his father Kronos? Well, the Rhapsodies take us on a new journey, and they say, and then Zeus went to the sacred cave and asked the Mother Supreme of all the gods, immortal Nyx, how am I to proceed? How can I inaugurate my rule with the immortal gods? How can I keep all things as one and yet separate? And blessed Nyx, gleaming with the blue of dawn, answered him, saying, surround everything in the aether, the heavens, the earth, the sea, and the stars, and bind them with a gold ethereal chain. And thus Zeus engulfed and swallowed Erechipaios, Phanes, employing all of his power, and drew everything that existed into the hollow of his belly. And now all things in Zeus were created anew. The sky, the sea, the earth, and all the blessed and immortal gods and goddesses, all that was then and all that will be, all mingled in the belly of Zeus. For a moment here, when Zeus swallows Phanes, and if we remember correctly, Phanes is the being of light, the firstborn god, proto-Logos, who came from the cosmic egg in the chaotic first reign, when there was only darkness and chaos and a yawning, gaping chasm at the beginning. This egg is compressed from the swirlings of time and necessity, Kronos and Ananke, and it splits, and then we have Phanes comes from this, this swirling. In this moment, Zeus swallows the beginning of all things, and for but a brief moment, in this Orphic theogony, Zeus is all that exists. What's interesting about this, and what I think gets missed, is this is also a sacrifice. This is a sacrifice of him, himself, the world before him. It is a massive, massive sacrifice that has to be made in order to rectify what has basically been a breach of that cosmic order by his father and his father before him. This phrase, in auto synistiken, is crucial. It directly addresses the problem posed to Nyx. How do I keep things unified yet distinct? How do I keep, in other words, what came before me, this transcendent nature, and yet create things as immanent again? All things find their structure and unity within Zeus, and much like that, Zeus holds everything together after swallowing Phanes, and as Nyx proposed, he does so with a golden chain. Now, this golden chain is basically the chain of Kronos. It is the binding power of Saturn, of Kronos, and it's very much like what we see happen in the Christ mythos. Christ descends, conquers death. Now, Kronos is the reaper. Kronos is the end of things. He is the limitation, the boundary of the cosmos. He is that which produces limit. He is the restrictor. And that is essentially what we're talking about when we think of death. And so if we take this and we look at how Christ, in his death, in his great sacrifice, somehow breaks the chains of death and subjugates the powers that be, we see the same thing happening in the Titanomachy here. The powers, the cosmic powers, the Titans that be are overthrown. They are bound in a chain, and they are subjugated to Zeus, and in that sacrifice of himself, because he will not be created in the same fashion as he was before, because he will be pre-existent in that moment of him absorbing the cosmos and everything existing within him, and then everything then being forced to be recreated. It is very much the same thing. So let's look at it side by side. Zeus, the transcendent, swallows Phanes and Repackaged, becoming the sole encompassing source. The prior existence ceases to exist. Just like John says in John 1:1, in the beginning was the Word was God, he is before all things, so is Zeus. The ultimate origin of this, he exists as the nexus, the locality of being, before he recreates the cosmos. The distinct divine nature of Christ is also apparent. We're seeing the same things. They exist apart from creation, before incarnation. Now, Christ doesn't go and, talk in a cave with, a prophetic Nyx character, but there is plenty of that in the Christian mythos of Christ always going to prayer, going to the Father for advice. How do I do this? What is it that I'm supposed to do in this sacrifice? Tit for tat, it's pretty much the same thing. We're seeking something much higher than ourselves, in this case, to tell us essentially what has to be sacrificed, how it has to be done. But there's also immanence in both of them. They're not both transcendent. He holds the entire created cosmos within himself. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us. Zeus is going to recreate all of the world in that moment. And then from that, he's also going to have to recreate himself in the flesh as well. There is a radical indwelling in both of them, a sustaining presence. They both recreate from within. And so what we're looking at is if not the same, the development of this Logos or this Johannian theology well before the emergence of Christianity. Let's see what we've got going on in the chat. Does Zeus said that at the beginning there was words and the Word has become God? So that means Christians are worshiping Zeus? Well, if you look at Zeus and Yahweh very close, they're both relatively known as storm gods, as creator gods, the creators of mankind. So there is quite a bit of parallel between what will be Yahweh from the Jewish mystical tradition and Zeus, which is the Greek. Now let's remember that Christianity is very much a Greek religion. It is basically the evolution of what was before with the Greek religion. This is where they were heading. We can see it happening well before Christianity happened. There was a move towards this either panentheism or a really strange mystical monotheism happening with things like the Derveni Papyrus, which you can read about. I am producing some pieces on that. Well, I mean, so yeah, Yahweh or Zeus is the god of Greece. Well, no, it's more like the god of all things, and that's one of the things that in antiquity they were very good about. They knew that there was some sort of hierarchy of being. They knew that there was some being at the top of this chain of being, and they, generally speaking, were comfortable saying, your God is the same as my God, I just call it something different. It's like different cultural perspectives talking about the same thing. Now, what does this mean for us? Well, the possibility that the core theological concept of the Christian Logos has precedence in the Orphic tradition kind of stunts a lot of the apologetics that the Christians have, that they were making up something new and incredible. It seems pretty obvious to me that if they did add any innovation, it wasn't much. Most of it is already there. It's already there, and the Orphics and Christians kind of moved in the same circles. So they're both very interested in salvation. They both practiced some asceticism. They lived in community. They were interested in equality. They were interested in overthrowing some of the old systems that were not helping people. They were interested in eliminating suffering in some way. This is something that's fairly common with religions that were reformist religions at the time, or cults that were kind of forming from the belly of an old religion. And so what we see is very similar lines between the two of them. This may be pointing to a specific religious evolution over time as well. The fact that these things are kind of cropping up in different cultural circles in the Mediterranean and the Near East points to the idea that potentially This is just the natural progression of things. This is where people, as they started to develop with civilization, went with their mystical and theological conventions. But it does raise interesting questions. It does point to a hidden history that most people are not, privy to. Maybe think that the previous iterations in, classical and or Hellenistic Greece were primitive and or, kind of, silly in some cases. And we'll see some of those apologetics come in here in a little bit here. But it's also something that I want to shed some light on, because I think this shared heritage is being obscured or has been obscured, and whether that's just part of time eclipsing things, or if it's deliberate. I could see some arguments for it being deliberate, given the fact that people have interests and agendas all the time. So it's not far beyond the kenning that somebody would want to eclipse something and give themselves a certain set of power. So what I did was, I don't know if this is super relevant where we're going, but what we're doing here is a comparative structural analysis based on primary sources. We're looking at the underlying conceptual parallels between Orphic and Christian theological structures, and then seeing how they play out within several texts. Again, going back to where we were before, we are talking about something that is emerging in the 6th through 4th century and carries through. Now, the Orphics are going to carry through all the way into the 1st, 2nd, 3rd century, but what we're talking about with the Logos, the Trinitarian theology that develops in the emergence of Christianity in that Hellenistic background, is coming potentially 600 years after these ideas are first being formulated in the Near East. Dr. Homojiju says, does that mean that Christianity evolved from Greece? It's the religion of Zeus, who claimed to himself as the king of the gods. Yeah, I mean, if we understand it properly, Christianity really is a Greek religion, and it is a Greek religion that mixed with a whole bunch of other different ideas from the Near East and the Mediterranean. So you have some Jewish mysticism. Obviously, the Bible is composed of the Old Testament, the Torah, the Tanakh. So we have a lot of the Jewish mysticism there. But we have to understand that, Paul is a Middle Platonic Greek dude. One of the dudes who's very responsible for the New Testament is a Middle Platonic Greek guy. Most of the New Testament it's all written in Greek. Greek was the lingua franca of the day, and so it is very much a Greek religion. So let's get into a little bit more about this Orphic cosmogony, and please feel free to keep at me in the chat, and we will talk about as much as I can to get to. Sometimes I feel related to the myth of Zeus being eaten by Metis. Yeah. And so I do want to get to that, because what Zeus does after this point, when he starts to recreate the cosmos, is very linked to the Titanesses, and we are going to get there. But first I wanted to bring up where we've kind of been with this whole story. So if we look at this diagram here, which is really nice, neatly done, in the Orphic cosmogony, this is how things are generated. Now, typically when we think about generations or hierarchies of being, it's very much based on Hesiod. And this is one of the things that the Christian theologians kind of balked at, this idea of the generation of gods. Well, if a god is born, then it can't be as powerful as something that's not born, right? I don't think that's necessarily what the Orphics were talking about here, the generation of gods being born. This is an encoding, if you will, of how the cosmos comes into being. Time. Necessity. Time is a constrictor. It is something that is going to compress and condense this unified field into different forms. Necessity is that engine that makes it go, right? Only until you have those two things can you have anything be born. Then we have Phanes, the firstborn, the first ruler of the cosmos. He is essentially light, right? He is light. And what needs to exist after a first point geometrically? You need to have a line. So you have a point and another point. Well, what is the opposite or the antithesis of light? It is darkness, night, nix. So what we see in the second point, we see this beautiful geometry unfolding, right? And then from Nyx and Phanes are born Uranus and Gaia, the heavens and the earth. This is very much, and I've covered this in some other live streams, these are the stages that we also see happening in the book of Genesis. Light comes first out of the chaos of the waters, then night, then the heavens and the earth. They're separated. They're separated, in this case, by Kronos, who basically cuts the generative power of Uranus and essentially severs him from the earth. And then from Kronos and Rhea is born Zeus. Now Zeus is going to throw this whole thing into chaos by having to essentially correct the sins of his forefathers. He has to restart and regenerate the universe. This is where Plato comes up with the demiurgos, the creator god. This is what we're talking about in the Bible, the demiurge, the Yahweh, the creator of the world as we know it. This is happening at this time, in this stage. All this other stuff that happened before is, at least in Genesis, is very much heavily stripped down to the studs and just says these are the things that this creator God created. Well, it's not necessarily untrue. What happens in the next stages of the Orphic cosmogony is Zeus creates everything basically as it was before, just without the problems that Uranus created. And he does this in a very unique way. He basically has to mate with all of the Titanesses. But he has to bring back, essentially, all of the old pieces of the puzzle. I kind of already covered this slide. Let's move through we've kind of talked about the Orphics. They were competing, but also similar narratives at the time. Let's see, we talked about Phanes. I have a lot of slides in here that I just have in case we need to riff on something, but I think we have enough to cover here. What I'm going to do, let's see. Okay, we'll stick here for a second. I'm going to bring up some of the rhapsodic theogony because it is incredibly important. Just going to pull this over here. Yes. Okay, so there's this great, amazing rhapsodic hymn, which I'm not going to go over right now. But we will here in a little bit because it's important to where we're going to go with it. But I wanted to get to what happens after Zeus begins to recreate the world. So he mingles with necessity, Ananke, which we've seen in the previous graphic here. Ananke, necessity. Fate has to be reborn first. What we're getting in this Orphic Rhapsody is how he regenerates the world. It's basically the cosmic framework that the world requires. He generates fate first, and then as Nyx had foretold in an oracle with the law-giving Themis, she is basically the embodiment of divine order. She says she was barren until the birth of Zeus. So when Zeus was born, then she became fertile. What does that mean, right? Obviously, we're not talking about actual physical fertility here. What we're talking about in the case of this is some sort of cosmic principle. So, what I've been talking about with Uranus resisting succession, with Kronos resisting succession, Themis, the embodiment of cosmic and divine order, is barren and cannot produce. That seems like a major, major metaphysical, mystical problem, doesn't it? If you can't even have order, produce order, then the cosmos is in a perpetual state of chaos. But in the birth, the moment of Zeus, a couple of really interesting things happen. Not only does Themis regain her fertility, but Rhea becomes Demeter. She becomes a new form of herself. As Zeus begins to recreate, his first mating is with Themis, and she bears him the glorious children, for she is the mother of the seasons, says the Orphic Rhapsodies. Justice, good order, and peace, and the seasons. Those ministers of Zeus who by their dancing make manifest the progression of nature. And by their daughter Eunomia, good order, her father, he fathered the Charites, the graces, splendor, the shining one, merriment, the well-meaning one, and abundance, she who flourishes. Notice here, he's mating with the feminine principle, and he is only bearing daughters to begin with, no sons. One might think, is Zeus trying to do the same thing that his father did? Trying to avoid the eventual overtaking that he is going to have to experience with his son? You might think so. Then Zeus pursues Dione, but she escapes his caresses, and his divine semen fell into the sea. And in spring, the season of new flowers, the seed spawned a wondrous foam from which the popular Aphrodite came forth, she who awakens laughter and who blesses the physical union of mortals. So important was Aphrodite that she was one of the first to be recreated in this new cosmos. So vital to the experience of what we experience as life. The only thing preceding that physical attraction, the desire that comes forth from Aphrodite. And again, I think it's funny that she is not necessarily born, but is just generated out of this fertility that this god has. So too was she generated from Uranus, from the mixing of the sea foam and the semen and the blood in the ocean in the first part of the cosmos, in the first version of the cosmos before Zeus recreates. So too is she also mixed of water and sea and semen, which is really fascinating that they chose not to have her be born in and or subjugated in some way in the Orphic mysteries, and there is a reason for that. But in others, like Hesiod, he just says, yep, she's the daughter of Dione, which is basically himself as a woman. Dione is basically the feminine Zeus. As we saw in the Orphic Rhapsodies, he is both male and female. So he pursued himself, which is a really fun idea here. Is he just basically emanating or emulating Amun or Atum from Egyptian mythology? Of course, the Greeks knew what the Egyptians were up to, so perhaps this is a nod or an homage to Atum from Egypt and Heliopolis. Beyond that, then he starts mating with Hera, where he fathers his first son, Hephaestus, the coppersmith, who was called the Lame God and the Untiring Fire. Hephaestus became the greatest of craftsmen, for as he had an inclination to make things, like the Cyclopes, those three divine craftsmen who fashioned the thunderbolts of Zeus taught him the art of creating beautiful brazen objects. Hephaestus mingled with Aphrodite and thereby created the form of the universe. So with the craftsmanship of his son with Hera, he, through Aphrodite, creates the frame or the form of the new universe. Then he united with Aglaia and produced good glory, abundance, and good omen, and friendliness, by which his works were made beautiful. So what we're seeing here is these Orphic Rhapsodies. These are all coming from fragments, and many of them, what we're getting them in the first, second, third centuries after Christ. These fragments that we have, these are the only extant texts that we have. So they're going to be dated around the same time as we are going to be seeing some of this Christian theology come out. But with the discovery of the Derveni Papyrus, many of these principles are outlined within the Derveni Papyrus. So we know they were talking about these things. We just don't have proof in between the papyrus and this particular time. Hey, yeah, Rufus, good to see you, man. He says in the Derveni manuscript, it seems like there's an understanding that the gods aren't sexual like human beings, but more like harmonic principles, and I have to agree. I think it can be both at the same time, as if you read it allegorically, or mystically versus what people might do literally. And I think one of the problems that we face, and one of the things that Plato talks about quite a bit, is don't listen to the poets. Because if you don't understand what they're saying and you take this too literally, you're in weird territory automatically. And so it's interesting. We do have these things that are echoing something from the 6th century in the 3rd century, many years later. So they were clearly talking about it. So then he goes on. Zeus goes on and he continues mating, and he mates with Hera again. They father Ares and Aletheia, who protects the birth of our progeny. Zeus continues to father many glorious children, Artemis and Apollo. So he mates again with another Titan, Leto. He mates with Metis, who then essentially he swallows, and that's how we get Athena, who bursts from his skull. And I have a couple of slides about this, so I need to go to them. Let me just cut through a lot of this. The Titans themselves, I think they get overlooked quite often. Thanks, Rufus. I appreciate it, brother. The Titans get overlooked in this. And I think there's a very important piece of the Orphic puzzle that has to be kind of parsed out here. He doesn't just conquer them. He chains them because they are required for material manifestation. They are required for the unified field of existence to be stretched and pulled. And this is one of the things the Titans are actually called: they who stretch, they who pull. Their function is to basically weave the cosmos. The Titans, the daimones, these spirits that take the unified field of all things and make them into separated parts of reality. This is what kind of forms you and I as separation, or the material world itself. The Titans are absolutely important. And so Zeus understands you can't just tie them up forever. You can't just banish them. You can't kill them. They're necessary principles. Now, the male principles are those things that are constrictive. Iapetus, the god of mortality, essentially, is necessary. Kronos, as the limitation of things, is necessary. Atlas, who holds the heavens above, is necessary. So he can't necessarily get rid of them. They are cosmic differentiators, and there is a specific resistance that needs to occur with the harmonic Olympians. So there's like this dissonance and harmonics that have to be created for the tension to occur, to create the space for this. Now, on the opposite end, the Titanesses, they are a more harmonic, integrative principle, and we're going to go through that. That's why he needs them to generate the spirits, the daimones, the gods, to basically run the world as it is. And so she then gave birth to 7 lovely daughters. This is talking about Rhea and Kronos, and the 7 kingly sons, indeed the great Titans, who are the powers of the natural world, they who drag or stretch. So they're absolutely vital, and they get missed a lot, I think, in this Titanomachy. It's just like, oh, they were chaos, they were bad guys, they had to go so the Olympians could rule. No. Both have to exist at the same time for material existence to manifest. That's, I think, the way they were looking at it. And yes, you can quote me on it. In the Orphic fragments, the Titans are described as they who drag and stretch, suggesting their primary cosmological function as forces that extend, differentiate, or individuate, while the Olympian principle represents the opposite, an anagogic, unifying integration. The Titanic principles enable multiplicity and distinction. This is evident in the Orphic Rhapsodies, where they have the Titans as these differentiators. They create the necessary tension. The cosmological narrative presents not only a simple truth of good and evil, but a necessary dialectic between integrative and differentiating forces. These have to occur for us to do what we do, which is live. He mingled his own limbs with the power and the strength of the god, for the reason with him all things within Zeus were made anew. I think there's a typo in there. He doesn't destroy the Titanic principle. He knows how important it is, and he knows how important it's going to be for his son, the one who is supposed to basically take over for him. And we're going to get to that. The dismembering force. the dismemberment that is going to happen with the Titans going after the young Zagreus, tearing him apart and eating him. This is part of what happens when the soul is removed from a unified everything, the unnameable unified field. To become an individuated piece, it has to be kind of rended, pulled, stretched, dragged, just like what's going to happen to Zagreus here. Dionysus is the first kind of template for that, and we'll get to him here in a second, but he undergoes this division into multiplicity. 7 pieces of his body representing the 7 planetary spheres, the cosmic differentiation into the material realm. And yet his heart mind, which is kind of interesting. I love how he presents this as a heart mind. I forget who preserves this fragment, but the heart mind is a very Eastern concept, so we can see that there are some potential Greco-Buddhist stuff kind of floating into the Orphic current, which I think is really fun, but suggests the preservation of divine intellect amidst manifestation. So the body is rent and just torn apart and consumed, but the heart and mind maintain the divinity. The subsequent punishment of the said Titans that are basically egged on by Hera to destroy Zagreus, they're struck by Zeus's lightning, reduced to ash, and from that ash, that's what humanity is created from. This is what Zeus uses to create the body. Now, the soul, the divine spark, is basically the heart, the mind. We are basically following the template of Dionysus. That's what humanity is made from. From this ash, the remains of the blasted Titans who had eaten Zagreus' flesh, Father Zeus revealed a new generation of mortals. A new generation of mortals. This establishes humanity as we are now, with Titanic, kind of a katabatic pulling down from unified everything, into, and also our anagogic function, the Olympian divine spirit that we have in each one of us. So we have this necessary tension. Now, there's some interesting hermeneutics we have to kind of go over real quick. I've kind of talked about it already. There's a cosmological need for tension. There is the anthropological, which is our dual nature, both Titanic and Olympian. But there's also a path for salvation, this soteriological path of integration. This is where I think we differ in this case from the Christian theology that follows. And this is, I think, possibly because Paul's a Middle Platonic, and the Middle Platonists, they're very much they'd integrated some weird Gnostic features. The demiurge is bad, so on and so forth. So material world, the Hylic world, is bad as well. That kind of seeps into some of the Orphics, and also very much into the Christian theology, that we have to either master or surgically remove or subdue the Titanic forces instead of kind of work with them as a necessary tension. And I think that what was missed here was that both need to be brought into some sort of balance while we're alive. There is an animal nature, there is this Titanic nature, and at the same time we have this divine nature. And what we see in the recreation of things is not a divorce from the Titanic nature. In fact, Zeus leans really heavily into it. He mates with basically all the Titans to create the functions of the world. So it's obvious that even in the creator of the world doesn't see the Titanic nature as bad, but necessary. In fact, it's what creates the multiplicity. We've kind of gone over that. And what is very clear, if you read Zeus, the way he is in Nonus's Dionysiaca, very much delights in the material world. Very much has a passion and a compassion, a love for the material world. Oh, what's this slide about? I don't think we need that one. There's some other pieces of the Titanomachy that are really interesting. Zeus goes... In Hesiod, he needs the help of the Hundred-Handers and the Cyclopes in order to win. Hesiod frames it very much like it was a stalemate beforehand, and Zeus he goes to Gaia in one variant, and he says, "What do I do?" She says, "Well, go to Tartarus and unleash my children." Now remember, Oranos put the children away in the belly of Tartarus and said, "We're not going to deal with that." Well, Zeus uses that to his advantage and unleashes basically the most powerful forces that have been known to the universe at this point on the Titans, and that's what kind of turns the tide. The Cyclopes give him the thunderbolts. They forge the thunderbolts for him that only he is able to wield. I talked about that a little bit in one of my Nonus videos earlier, a couple of weeks ago, where he has a specific sinews, almost like an ability that he can. He's the only one who can equip the thunderbolts that the Cyclopes make, and then you have the 100-handers who basically are hurling boulders and such that Hesiod touches on. Curiously, those are not included in the Titanomachy for the Orphics. Maybe we only have it's only because the fragments are missing and we only have a fragmented nature in the extant text, but they're curiously not there. So the fate of the Titans, what happens to them? What becomes of many of them? Many of the dudes seem to be locked up for a time, but eventually are kind of let go. Kronos is at first locked up, but then kind of positioned at this metaphysical level by the Neoplatonists as beyond all things, as the limit of things. In the Orphic fragments, though, he represents, again, the limiting principle. I've talked about that, and provides structure to infinity. And his name connects to Kruan ton Nuon, he who strikes and awakens the mind. That's an interesting way to put it. If Oranos represented the mind in some ways, in fact, he's the limitations of the mind. And Kronos does strike him and perhaps awakens something within Oranos when he strikes him and cuts off his generative capacity. I don't know. But this indicates he has a cosmological principle to differentiate consciousness through temporal limitation, meaning time is what gives us this feeling of separation. So Kronos is very important to the way things are set up in Zeus's cosmos. So he is bound and killed in some versions, and then sometimes just castrated and then elevated later. I don't think the psychological dimension is all that interesting, but we kind of touched on it here. This differentiation of consciousness and separation is something to think about. I haven't really parsed out what the full function of the Titans really is. For me at least, there's just so little on the Titans. But the binding is salvifically important. This necessary limitation of rigid temporal consciousness allows for transformative experience through the mysteries, and that's where we're getting when we get to Dionysus. So who else was there? Atlas was one of the big generals of the Titanomachy against Zeus. His name means to endure, and he embodies the principles of endurance that prevents cosmic collapse. So essentially, Zeus knows he's got to have these guys in order for the cosmos to function. So they're not only remade after this point, but subjugated by that golden ethereal chain, much like Christ does, to death and to those sorts of things. This salvific feature, though, I think is what's important to us here. The labor of Atlas suggests spiritual transformation requires not just the elimination of the support structures, but the integration of them consciously. And the weight he bears creates that space in which salvation can unfold. So let's see what we got going on in the chat. Well, we got a lot of activity. I love it. Keep it coming, guys. Keep it coming. Let me see if I can pick something out here. Rufus says there are memory and cognition cells they have found in the heart as well as the brain. Oh, yes. Going back to the heart mind. I love that. I love it when science and myth comes together. You're right. Zeus gives the heart to Semele directly or via a potion, and she becomes impregnated with him. Then the Hera things happen, I think. No, it's definitely Orphic, Blue Owl. It's definitely Orphic. I haven't dug into how Hesiod covers it just yet. Dionysus is very much the heart of Dionysus and Zeus are the heart of the Orphic tradition, and Hesiod kind of deals with it differently. But that is how it happens. She is incinerated in most cases by the blinding glory of Zeus, and then either Hermes or Athena, it depends on the variant, rescues the heart, and then from that he takes the heart and he sews it into his thigh, and I believe it's his right thigh, and then he carries the child to full term, which is really interesting. It's like 3 extra months or something like that, because she was pregnant for a while. I can't remember. It was something short of the 9 months. And then from his thigh is where Dionysus is born. And so because she is incinerated, she can't carry Dionysus to full term, so Zeus must be the father and the mother of Dionysus. And that's an interesting point in the Orphic tradition, is Zeus is both the father and mother of the eventual Dionysus, whereas originally Zagreus is the daughter of Persephone. And so Zeus has to impregnate Demeter to make Persephone, and then he goes and he impregnates Persephone. And so it's this kind of like step down feature. What I think they're pointing to with a lot of this is the necessity of creating a material form of Zeus. It's their way of showing eminence, that the god will take physical form, will take flesh. And so he mates with all of these different titans all the way down to Rhea, who is Demeter, who then becomes Cora or Persephone, and from that is Zagreus, and then Zagreus is then essentially implanted from Zeus into Semele, who then gets immolated by him because Hera gets jealous, and then from that he takes the heart and he carries the child to full term in his thigh. Some of the other titans, the 100-handers and the Cyclopes, we went over that. So Zeus basically goes and then he aligns himself with all the Titanesses. Many of the Titanesses were, yeah, Kendall, he's basically self-created. He creates himself in a step-down, more condensed form, and then that's essentially how he maintains control of the cosmos. It looks like a workaround. Like if the divine order was interrupted by Uranus and Kronos not wanting to give over power, then Zeus manifesting himself as his son becomes really kind of like mental gymnastics, or a sort of clever loophole to get around the problem of not giving up power. But, these things are never going to be, very clearly drawn out where we can be like, oh, okay. Because then you have people who are like, no, Dionysus is even older than Zeus. We can point to, parts of Dionysus being, so much older than Zeus's prominence in the historical record and what we found out, archaeologically. But so this thing with the Titans and the Titanesses, each one that he mates with, it seems like, for one, his consumption or swallowing is something that's brought up by Dwayne Meissner in his Orphic tradition and the birth of the gods. The swallowing thing is a really interesting aspect of this Greek Orphic mythology, and it's somewhat Near Eastern. There's some other swallowing myths that happen in some of the Near Eastern counterparts. But the swallowing of Phanes, giving him the power of the universe, wasn't apparently enough. Because then he goes and swallows Metis, who is basically known as the most cunning of all beings, and in doing so, he essentially absorbs her cunning, and that was necessary for him to kind of like reorder the cosmos and birth wisdom. Right? Athena comes from this. from this attempt of Zeus to kind of absorb the power. But then this is my own kind of like weird, maybe tinfoil hat, his mating with each one of the Titanesses seems to give him a portion of their power. Divine memory from Mnemosyne, divine order from Themis, from Rhea. He gives basically potentially the power to carry Dionysus to full term, because she is the divine matrix through which all things come into being. So I think that's really interesting. Him mating with her not once, his own mother, Demeter, but then also mating with his daughter from Demeter. Maybe he's absorbing some sort of generative power from the feminine, which has its own issues, like that's, at least from our modern perspective. But these are mediators. These Titanesses, they're integrative forces, and so Zeus, I think, understands these are complementary and they're not in conflict, and he needs them. So, kind of already touched on it, but Mnemosyne is the divine memory, and as personified, she represents the continuity across manifestation. Her union produces the muses, who are going to inspire divine harmony and knowledge. There's 9 of them. And then Mnemosyne represents the aspect of consciousness that maintains connection with divine origins. So all of creation will have a memory of what came before. Should we work hard enough for it, that is. This anamnesis is essential to salvation. If we can't remember where we come from, if we can't remember our divine origin, then we don't have salvation. We don't know how to attain it. We need that. So Zeus knows this. So he mates with Mnemosyne, produces the muses. He mates with Themis, divine law, and from that produces good order, splendor, merriment, and abundance, and the seasons. And this basically sets up the structure of the cosmos. These are the laws by which all things will be bound. It's how it all works. The Greeks, I think, inherit this from their love of the Egyptians, and the Egyptians and Ma'at were very much interested in order. It's a hallmark of civilization, after all. If you don't have order, you have the opposite. And that one, not so good. And then Rhea kind of touched on this. This is the aspect of consciousness that allows transformation through yielding rather than through resistance. Now, the Titans are that resistant force. The Titanesses are more receptive. Now, Oceanus is the real interesting one here. Oceanus, sorry, it's a k sound. Oceanus, he decides he's not going to participate in the wars. He decided he was not going to participate in the first one, and he decided he's not going to participate in the next one. He's just like chilling the whole time. He's like, I'm not going to mess with your war. Well, part of the great rhapsodic hymn to Zeus talks about the belly around the waist of Zeus is the water. Now, Oceanus is usually symbolized as the belt of water around the earth. And I think this is really interesting. I don't know why Oceanus is depicted this way, but there's got to be, I'm going to look more into it, why they decided to keep him out of it. This force kind of produces a limit on the earth itself, if you look at the way that they draw it out. I'm just going to check this out. Channel Warhorse. Everybody's being so active today. I really appreciate it, guys. Thank you. Let me see if I can pick something out here. It's like Blue Owl says, Rhea is said to be the mother of Persephone, I think, by Zeus in some version, and an offspring. It's messy. You know, there's always a different version. So, so let's look at the soteriological significance. Mighty cloud-gathering Zeus, with deep foreknowledge, understood that he must marry his mother Demeter, the Earth Mother, who is also Rhea, she who designed the works of the droning bees. Hey, Healing with Diamonds, welcome. So he knows through Metis, through his cunning and his deep foreknowledge, that he must marry his mother. Because it's only through the Earth Mother that the proper succession can occur. So he's had children already. He's had Apollo, he's had Ares, he's had all of these other children with all of these other feminine forces. But the only one who can reign, who can be the king, is got to come from the Earth Mother. Zeus knows this. Kronos came from the Earth Mother and the Sky Father. Now Zeus is the Sky Father, so he must mate with his mother, who has now become Demeter. This is how he gets the proper succession. Man, I copied a lot of this over too many times on some of these slides. I apologize. The necessity of both the Titanic and Olympian principles create salvation. So he knows that that has to occur. So I think that with this foreknowledge, he also knows what's going to happen to his son when he basically creates Zagreus, which is really sad. Like, if you think about it, he does it anyways. And this shows the compassion that we see in the Christian theology. The father knows that this is going to happen to the son, but it's something that has to occur for salvation to happen. The this pattern of cosmic integration is also embedded in it. There's an initial punishment of the Titans, but then they are reconciled after a time, and this is usually just reconciled through Dionysus and through the coming about of his ability to reveal the mysteries to both mortals and immortals in some cases. And he's basically the bridge between transcendence and immanence. And so that's what Dionysus is going to become. And the way this all comes about, this is another part that I think gets missed a lot of the time, is this doesn't come about without Nyx. Without the mother of all things, without this prophetess, without Zeus paying very close attention to what she says, because Kronos and Ouranos didn't. Kronos and Ouranos did not pay attention to what she had to say. Zeus does. Maya, supreme of all the powers divine, immortal night, how with unconquered mind must I source of the immortal Sphinx? Bring about what I say, O maiden of Tartaros, bound your access to the chains of Kronos. He follows it to a T, and it actually works out for him. His sacrifice of himself, though, I think is really interesting, because it's not a conquest of all things. It's often positioned as a conquest, and I don't think that's necessarily accurate. I think that it was a sacrifice, and it continues to be a sacrifice as Zeus goes through all these motions to create Dionysus. And to do so, he does with a very important spin. It is to alleviate with compassion the suffering that occurs when manifestation happens, when separation from unity occurs. So he must do this, and he does it through the swallowing of Phanes. We've gone over that, blah, 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 blah. Too many slides, Frater OD, too many slides. I want to get to, we've kind of talked about the demiurgic function already. He's beyond gender. We've kind of talked on that binary categorization. The Orphic Rhapsodic Hymn talks about it, but also it's illustrated in him carrying Dionysus to fruition. Here's some interesting pieces. Finally, get to some slides that have some good stuff. So he, in the cosmology, he's said to establish an ethereal chain. Well, this kind of goes back to what I think they're riffing on Plato a little bit here. Orpheus also indicates that these things say that the intelligible god Phanes was absorbed by the demiurgus of wholes, and Plato asserts that the demiurgus looks to the paradigm. So he's looking back into the previous world for essentially for how this world is supposed to be created. And this is a very Neoplatonic idea of the demiurge kind of looking back at the same time as looking into the immanent world, but he's able to see the light of Phanes, which is, I guess, now within him. But according to the theologist, however, the demiurgus leaps, as it were, to the intelligible god, Phanes, And the fable says, absorbs him. For it would be a requisite clearly to unfold the doctrine of our preceptor, the god who is called proto-Logos by Orpheus, and who is established at the end of intelligibles, is animal itself, with Plato. Excuse me, I'm losing my voice here. I need some water. This is kind of going into how the demiurge creates things, but this is from a more Neoplatonic and very intelligible versus intellective, and there's various levels to the hierarchies that can get very, very confusing, and I think not always helpful. For the Orphics, it was about the poetics of the matter, but it is very clear that we see a creative function that parallels the Johannian Logos. His transformative ingestion of Phanes is a piece that leads to the all-containing unity, which is both transcendent and immanent. And then we get to the birth of Persephone. And this is where I really wanted to go, because this is what completes the idea that I'm talking about here, about the Trinity and the Logos. You have to have a transcendent Father, you have to have some sort of Holy Spirit, and you have to have a Son. And this is what the pieces of the Trinity that you have to have: transcendent, immanent, and then something somewhat in between. Well, the Orphics and the Greeks before Christianity handled it in a different way, with Persephone, with Dionysus, with Cora, Dionysus, and Zeus. So we talked about it. He has to mate with the Earth Mother, but in his first meeting with the Earth Mother, he bears a daughter. And the daughter's not going to work, right? So he then has to mate with the Earth Mother again. It seems as though the Earth Mother, upon birthing something new, in some cases loses the ability to be the Earth Mother. It's really strange, because why wouldn't he just mate again with Demeter? Why wouldn't he just mate with her again? Instead, we see him in Nonus in the Dionysiaca overwhelmed with desire for Persephone, and then he turns into a snake, and he mates with her, who in some ways turns into a snake, and so we have this maybe a caduceus being formed, the snakes swirling into each other, and then they bear the little horned Zagreus. And you can see where Christian apologists are going to take this. Snakes and horns, obviously the work of the devil. Not necessarily the case, of course. So he has intercourse with Persephone. It's often called an abduction. And this is where I think we get the abduction of Persephone, where Hades abducts her. There's kind of just split variants of what happens to Persephone. But her cosmic role in the Orphic is a little bit different. It's very much like what we're going to see with Mary, but from it we get a different version of this salvific Christ creator. We get Zagreus, and then Zagreus is killed. He then becomes Dionysus through a second birth. And from this is what we get the creation of humanity. This separation, the Titanic nature and the Olympian nature. And what that creates in us is some sort of discombobulation of who we are. We travel through this metempsychosis from death to birth, and we lose our memory of who we are, what we are, and we suffer because of it through this dual nature, and that creates the space for salvation. Now, the Zeus-Dionysus relationship forms a remarkably clear antecedent to the Christian father-son dynamic, where that is emphasized in this passage. And this is from the fragments, I forget which fragment this is, I should have marked it. This child, conceived from the heart of Zagreus, is now born again and transformed into Dionysus, and Zeus, through his blessed son, sets them free from the sting of endless passion and sufferings. Zeus works through his son to accomplish salvation for humanity, precisely the pattern that later is established in Christian theology. The son undergoes dismemberment, or the passion, and rebirth to effect salvation. This isn't a coincidence. This is a sophisticated theological framework that Christianity took, reconfigured, and relabeled. we have it again here. This is towards the ends of the fragments that we have of the story as it's compiled now. The child conceived from the heart is born again, transformed. It is he who, along with the daughter, and this is the key part. You have to have Dionysus and Cora for the mysteries. So, just like in the Trinity, you have to have the Holy Spirit and Jesus to understand the transcendent Father. So, too, do you understand the compassion of the transcendent Father in this Trinity through the mysteries of Eleusis, right? Of Persephone, her catabasis into the underworld, basically teaching us about death, and also the relief of said death through the Dionysian mysteries. It was often thought that Dionysus could bring anybody back from the dead. He could resurrect anybody. He resurrects his mother, Semele, and he doesn't just resurrect her into mortality. He resurrects her as an immortal goddess. So he has the power to resurrect even to the level of becoming and living and being among the gods. And thus men make great sacrifices of 100 oxen, and practice the mystic rites yearning for freedom. And Zeus, through his blessed son, sets them free from the sting of endless passions and sufferings. That is the prototype version for what is happening in the Christian theology. And to be entangled by the demiurgic God, who determining reward for all in conformity with merit, both to the wheel of destiny and generation, which according to Orpheus we are unable to escape without the favor of the gods, in which Zeus enjoined to free the human souls from the circle of births and lift them from misery. This is not the Zeus that we get in the Disney form and version. This is not the Zeus that we get through really bad teachings of mythology in grade school or high school. This is a Zeus that just doesn't get the right PR. And that's one of the things I'm hoping to do here. Show the compassion of this guy. It's so evident. How does it compare, though, right, to Christianity? Therefore, if anyone is in Christ, the new creation is come. The old is gone, the new is here. The Titanic is gone, the Olympian is here. Since the children have flesh and blood, he too shared in their humanity, so that by his death he might break the power of him who holds the power of death, that is the devil, or Kronos, and free those who all their lives were held in slavery by their fear of death, the sting and sufferings of misery of death. Having canceled the charge of our legal indebtedness here, of course, in Colossians is talking to death. We owe a debt of our mortality, which stood against us and condemned us. He has taken it away, nailing it to the cross. Through the resurrection of Dionysus, we have the same thing. And that's all I have prepared for you guys today. I mean, I'm happy to hang around and riff for a little bit here. I've got plenty of time, but I see everybody's been really active, and I appreciate that very much. What do we got? Anybody got any compelling questions about the proto-Logos, the obvious Trinity that is occurring in the Orphic mysteries, the clear parallels to what we see? I'm glad we got some more people on here today. The last couple have been only a few, and the chat has been kind of sad, so it's good to see you guys. Perhaps I'll play the song again, and then you guys can yeah, I'm just kind of riffing there with the Kronos is the devil, but in this particular passage of Hebrews, they're calling the devil death. It's very clear here. The power of him who holds the power of death. So the devil. Christians take it in a very strange anti-death sort of way. I think my own personal take on this is that when you undergo the Eleusinian mysteries, it's quite clear from much of the writing that comes down to us is that the fear of death was dispelled upon undergoing the mysteries. You had an understanding of where you came from, why you're here, and those sorts of things are not necessarily accessible to us anymore. And so without having the mysteries available, death becomes a specter that is quite difficult for people to come to terms with. And Kronos does represent that limitation, but it's not only Kronos in Greek or Orphic mythology. The mortality comes from Iapetus, who's one of the Titans. He is the father of mortality, called the Piercer. And so there's multiple layers of why mortality exists. But I think in the case of Dionysus, in the case of what Zeus in recreating the world is doing, is providing a framework for redemption to occur while we're alive, not necessarily in death. It used to be that redemption came in death in ancient Egypt, in some ways. The Book of the Dead itself is a manual for what you're supposed to do when you die to redeem yourself of any particular wrongdoings against the cosmic order. And I think that's what's occurring here on a small scale. Zeus is rectifying the cosmos in his macrocosmic way, and microcosmically too. We as his children, just like Dionysus, have to redeem ourselves. And that is, I think, what the crux of this is there's a container for us to look at death without fear and say that we can be redeemed. Rocking unity in love. Hell yeah. That's what this is all about. No, I don't have it uploaded on the channel, but I can play it again for you. I'll go ahead and do that now. Which one was it? I made so many versions of this, so I think this is it.
Before the heavens had a name, before the cosmos came to be, Zeus swallowed light and became all things, the first Logos eternally. They tell you that the truth began 2,000 years ago, but the word was spoken long before their stories ever flowed. In the belly of the God who held the cosmos in his frame, the same pattern, different name. Zeus is the first and the last, the head and the center, all things from him, born male and female, beyond all limits. The word was corrupted, but never dies. His son dismembered for our sake. From ashes we were made anew. The heart preserved, the cycle breaks. This salvation isn't new. They twisted ancient wisdom into something they could own. Repackaged revelation built on foundations not their own. The same divine compassion through the Son to set us free. The same story, can't you see? Zeus is the first and the last, the head and the center, all things from him, born male and female, beyond all limits. The word was corrupted, but never dies. In his body dwells the stars, his eyes the sun and moon. The golden chain connects all things, the truth cannot be hewn. They tried to cut the Orphic roots and claim the flower their own, but underneath the borrowed words, the same seed has been sown.
Yeah, that I was trying to come up with something that brought back some vibes from about 20 years ago on that track. So glad you enjoyed it. But yeah, Blue, I noticed you were talking about Iapetus as a really vile dude. I uh, his kids are really interesting too. Um, as you pointed out, Prometheus steals the fire. Epimetheus has his own thing. Then you have Atlas and God, what's the fourth one? It's really interesting. I did a live stream if you're interested in Prometheus and them on the Titans and the cosmic structure that they basically create. Not only Titans but their children, like the second order of Titans. I did that one a couple of weeks ago. I think it's the science of the Titanic cosmos or something. It's in one of the replays on the Esoteric Odysseys playlist. But that one has some really interesting pieces, including some diagrams that talk about the second order Titans. I do want to do more about that in the future. Yeah, some hip hop energy. It's like I was trying to get AI to make a song about, like, kind of like in the vein of Linkin Park. I must have tried to generate like 14 versions of that before I got one that I was like, okay, we can do this on the show. I got a couple more minutes, guys, if you want to ask any more questions about what we covered here today. And Zeus, the proto-Logos, Dionysus, or any of it really. Feel free to ask away. Thanks, Channel Warhorse. Love your contributions as always. It's always interesting. One of these days, might have to have you on for an interview to talk about some of the math that you're coming up with. Math is not my strong suit. I'm a words guy, so it's for me it's all about the stories and the words. But the math is always really interesting. You know, the geometry of it especially is very fascinating to me. Peace, channel. I do, again, appreciate you guys coming today to hang out with me, talk about Zeus, his compassion, this is a little bit of Zeus PR, some Zeus propaganda, if you will, trying to give Zeus a better image than he has currently. See if there's anything I missed that I can riff on for a couple minutes, but nice. Thanks, No Turn Unstoned. Thanks for the bullseye. Glad to hear it landed. It's important that it lands for you guys. Keeps me going. Keeps me at doing these and making more videos, so I appreciate it. Couple more minutes and then I'm gonna shut her down. This is an interesting piece as well. It says here, and I'm going to have to look this up because I didn't even notice this earlier when I found this image. Upon becoming ruler of the cosmos, Zeus cannibalizes Phanes to gain his power. Phanes continues to exist inside Zeus until he is reborn as Zagreus. So, in the event of Zagreus being reborn, does Zagreus then hold the power of Phanes? That is something I'm going to have to dig into. That is really interesting. Woo! That's a bombshell. I can't believe I didn't notice that before. I haven't seen that yet. I wonder where they came up with that in this image. We'll look into it. All right, guys. Thanks so much for coming and chatting and watching. I'll be back next week.